Right, well that's had long enough, and I'm not patient enough to wait any longer. Let's just slacken this screw off slightly so I can get this lever underneath there without damaging anything. That's better. Now the screw that goes through there is this one. It's a shoulder screw that pivots around the shoulder at the top of that screw. The screw locates that bush that the gear runs around. There we go. Now that screw was, I think, was loose when we started. I'll tighten up that screw. That should be it. I should be able to cock and fire the shutter from here. Let's use the cocking shaft. Whoops. Put that back in place so I can control the action with it. If I release the shutter, allow the arm to roll back, the shutter closes. I'll revolve it further. At this stage the mirror and capping plate should come up. The capping plate, when that comes up, it hits this lever here, which allows the action to continue and the shutter to run down. So that's all working correctly. That appears to be good. So, our insulator here, fibre washer insulator, goes on there. Let's get that in position. And then this wire needs to be soldered onto that connection. So I'll do that. So I've just got to solder that down there and then seal that whole fibre washer with the black paint that I used to cover that soldered joint. And that's sufficient. You don't need to glue the washer down as well. The black paint will achieve all of that for you. Well, that went very well. No problem there. So I'll just take a little bit of black paint on the end of a toothpick. Make sure I cover that flash contact where that was soldered on, and typically I'll just run a little bit round the edge here and let that paint glue that washer in place, that fibre washer. So it's not going anywhere, it's just to stop it floating around really. I think they were a bit over enthusiastic with the gluing that they'd used originally. What's next? Well, here we have this piece here. This is just a piece of leather. It's the buffer that the mirror comes up against. And I'll just squeeze a drop of adhesive onto a scrap of paper and transfer that to that piece of leather with a toothpick. That's if I can get into the adhesive, because the top has glued itself on. Right, start with that. taking a little bit of adhesive on a toothpick, just run that across there, pick that up, make sure there's none on the front face, and put this in position, which is that way. Make sure that's centered up. Snug that down into position. And the little cutout in the middle of that piece just goes where the gear is. It's just to stop the gear scuffing against it. It's not that it's driven at that point, that's just where the teeth are running virtually at the surface. Right, so there, that's ready to go back on the camera. The front control rings, always I fit those after this is all in place. There's nothing else here to be done now with the shutter except fit that back to the body. So I can turn my attention to doing the final work on the body and then swing this into place, I expect. Checking make sure what components I've got here. Right, that's it. I'll go and find the body. Got to put the transfer shaft and things in that. Alright, taking the body, I need to put my transfer shaft back in, and I need a bracket on here to hold the spring on the front cam, because we have to preload that spring before fitting the front. I've just got this little bracket here with a wee notch in it to hold the spring, and I've just screwed that temporarily in place. And here's my transfer shaft here, the cam. Now there's an adjustment screw in this which you can use to adjust the cocking of the front cam and effectively the shutter. That screw was loose before. I'm just checking that it's not loose now because I don't want it falling out. I will put a touch of lacquer on that once I've got that sitting to my satisfaction. That looks fine. So a bit of molybdenum paste here would be a useful thing. I'll run some on those cam surfaces. That's where they run across the levers that operate the mirror and capping plate. I'll run a little bit of synthetic grease on the gear at the back. That's where that couples with the shutter cocking rack. And I can swing this into position. And I know from experience that oh look, there's something wrong. What have I done there? I think I've got my screwing upside down there, have I? Oh, I have indeed. Let's take that screw out and put it in the right way up. Lucky I didn't do anything rash like glue it in place. That's a good place to start. Now I'll get my cam in position, and it sits at about that angle, just like that, which I know from experience, but which you can see illustrated in the Retina Reflex S service manual. And the front cam, I'll just run some molybdenum paste through the centre and some around the cam surface here where that runs on the front levers, and that will just sit in place on the cam we've just put in place. That rotates fully clockwise until it stops. This spring has got to come around 1.5 turns pretty much from where it currently is, at least one full turn of spring tension. This is only marginally hard to achieve. If I find the right tweezers, I can probably get it done. Oh, and the camera battery's going flat, so I better change that. Right, this spring. Let's see, let's roll that round. Right, so I've got it hooked in position at the moment, but I need to come one full turn from there. To tension that spring one full turn. This is only a little bit impossible to do. That's it, that's sitting in position, that's one full turn, or one full turn plus. That's all good. Looking at the position of this spring here, and that's not correct at the moment, that's come adrift from where that needs to be under there, that's good. The mirror, I've got to put the mirror back into the body. Now I have the mirror here, it's been carefully wrapped in tissue. And such marks as you see at the bottom edge here will be where it contacts that mirror buffer on the back of the shutter. Now I should be able to slide this into the tray just about. Under those clips. Slides back. Now I'm going to take the opportunity at this point to put a spot of glue here and here so that that mirror can't get away. Sometimes they'll rattle slightly in the tray and they will actually scrape the back of the front of the shutter and cause problems. So a couple of spots of glue at this point will save potentially a lot of grief. Now they shouldn't be able to slop about, they should be a fairly neat fit in the tray. But should and actually are two different things. That's all that's needed. That's it, the mirror's just clipped into place. I'm pleased to say that the spring tension on the clips that retain it is obviously good. That was quite a positive snap. That part is good. Now the body at this stage, everything's in there, everything's connected up and it's ready to have the shutter put back in. So all I've got to do now is place my washers. These spacer washers are spring washers if you like, they're dish shaped. And they're stacked up to provide the maximum amount of adjustment here so that you can adjust the position of the front casting effectively and therefore adjust the position, or adjust the amount of the distance between the lens flange and the film plane. On the earlier Retina Reflex cameras without the interchangeable lenses, there was no such provision made. it didn't need to be, well, it wasn't as necessary because you could make all your adjustments at the helical, because the lens helical was part of the camera body. Here, of course, the lens helical is part of the lens, and you will be changing from one lens to another. It's imperative that the body is the distance of the lens flanges to a standard, so that you can take a lens and have some expectation that it'll focus correctly at the film plane. Okay, so we have our shutter, we have our body, everything is sitting in position, and if I'm very, very lucky, this will all go smoothly, everything will drop into position, and I should be able to get the shaft coupled correctly with the shutter. Lift that chrome trim to allow that to drop down. Hold down the mirror slightly so that the mirror goes down underneath that leather buffer. Check that the screw holes here are running. I can see it's going through the washers, so the washers aren't displaced. I'll put two of the original screws through at the base here in their lower positions. It's imperative that those washers don't get lost. If they come loose, they will do useful things, like they will sit somewhere tucked away neatly in the body until it suits them at some stage in the future to come loose, and they can fall into the mechanism and jam something and create havoc. Those two are in place at the bottom. At the top, I'm going to use two longer screws to pass down through there. The screws that I'm using here are actually the screws that are normally used for holding the film advance lever in place. And this is just so that those washers can't get away. And that's not the right screw. Let's find the right one. And this one. Alright, so the washers can't get away. Now the front's not fitting back hard because the cam and everything is sitting over to one side and it's not dropping into the gear at all. Something just dropped there, and I don't know whether it's coupled in place. It looks like potentially it could be. If I release the shutter, let's try cocking this. No, you can see the shutter didn't quite cock. The timing's not quite right. I almost had it, but not quite. Probably one tooth out. Let me look at the action of that and see how it goes. That's pretty close. And it's the timing of the front cam to the shutter itself that's out by one tooth, I would say. Now potentially you could just about make that adjustment with that adjusting screw on the cam there. I would prefer not to have to make an adjustment to start off with. That's something that you can do further down the track if you need to. I'd much rather it just worked correctly to start off with, or a little bit more correct than it currently does. Okay, so I'll have to try that business again, and Unfortunately, that does require removing all this and starting again. You can sometimes sneak it by cheating, but in my experience it's easier just to reset everything and have another go at putting the front on, and that's usually as quick as any other method. So when I lift this, the shutter will probably complete, and I've lost my tension on the cam here. I'll just check that everything else is in place. Yeah, the main cam is in position. The washers here, they're easily displaced. So while I'm fighting with the spring, they'll be trying to get away. Let that mirror up, that'll allow that cam to revolve around slightly. I should be able to get that spring hooked around. That's right, so now I need one full turn. No, that rear cam's shifted, I think. My washers here are all trying to get away, so I'll just lift those out, save having to fish them out from down in the body. Okay. There's something odd going on there. That spring's not tensioning well. Let's get these washers out so that I don't lose them anyway. That cam is shifting. Can't be engaged with the cocking rack correctly. That's better. Oh, this is plain hard to get. That spring is catching underneath. How's it doing that? That's it. It's wriggled back into position, along with much fighting. Didn't even need to swear too much. Let's have another go. It's more common than not to have 2 attempts at this before you get it right. It's not uncommon to have more than 2 attempts. We can let that mirror up, I think. That's better. Right, so this, I've got to cock this shutter and get that sitting back at a decent rest position, because that's half cocked at the moment. That should be down. That's back to the rest position. That's pretty good. Let's try again. I'm just making sure that everything is in position before I lower this into place, because with luck I'm not coming back in. Get the mirror seated correctly, and that's that. Two of the original screws in the lower positions. This is just to ensure that the washers cannot get away. The upper position, now those washers are trying to get away. That stack of washers is a little bit out of line. Just get that screw started. That's all that's required. And the same over here. Right, so the washers can't get away. Mirror's correctly positioned. Let's push that cam across. Let's move this rack here. I'll put a bit of tension on it, see if it'll revolve. That just felt like something was dropping in there, but it didn't. Still not convinced. That's just dropped into place. I just felt that. Right, let's see if the shutter will cock correctly this time. Oh, something's not moving there correctly. What's going wrong? Yeah, something's not right. The shutter release is jammed. It's not sitting on something correctly. Run that screw up lightly. What's going on here? Well, the film release didn't release. I'm not sure why. Okay, something ain't right. Back as we were. That's not going to go. Why did that not release? I think that the shutter release tab here was not sitting correctly over the top of that screw. Alright, is everything still there? Yes. The spring miraculously didn't spring. Have another go. The mirror's down. Why is the... No, the mirror's not down. That's okay. I thought for a second the mirror was in the down position, which would not have been correct. The screws are trying to get away. Have to chase it. Right, 4 screws in position, the washers can't get away. Push the cam across. Yeah, things aren't even vaguely looking like they're lined up. That shutter release can't, that's better. That's better. That sounded better. That sounded like a shutter that worked, so we'll just run these screws up snug. And at the top, I need one of my original screws. That's enough screws, that won't come apart now. Right, let's see what happens. Cock the shutter. That's all working. That's all working exactly as it should. Now I can find the other original screw, which I've just dropped on the ground, replace the one at this position, and I'll fit the shutter release button at that stage and we can carry on.